Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media.
Today on Spotlight, the University of Missouri uses a groundbreaking new tool that helps people with respiratory conditions. Plus, the exhibit that features what may be the first all-female life-size chess set. And then her talent as a seamstress not only freed her from slavery, but also earned her a job in the White House. But first, find out about the notes written inside a Bible owned by Johann Sebastian Bach. It's Sunday and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
On the campus of Concordia Seminary in Clayton, in the Christine K. Hasse Memorial Library, back behind the Rare Book Reading Room, which is adjacent to the Rare Book Storage Room, is where you'll find this library's rarest book of all. So valuable, we can't show you exactly where they keep it, but we can show you exactly what it is.
Apparently Bach bought it for his personal use.
Yes, that Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach. And this was his family Bible. And not just any Bible, but a 3-volume study Bible, published in German with commentary by Lutheran theologian Abraham Kalov. But it's not Kalov's commentary that makes this Bible priceless.
The really fascinating thing about this Bible is it's not just Bach's signature on the title page. We have his marginal annotations and some fairly lengthy comments throughout. And his comments on passages where he talks about music in the Old Testament celebrations and things like that are really pretty interesting for Bach scholars to look at.
Take, for example, Bach's comments, handwritten in German, scribbled alongside 2 Chronicles 5.
The note that Bach writes in the margin here says, "Note well, where there is devotional music, God with his grace is always present."
The story of how Concordia Seminary came into possession of the Bach Bible is itself a tale of biblical proportions. Beginning with a German immigrant who bought it from a used bookseller in Philadelphia in the early 1800s. They think this marking somehow indicated the price. The buyer was Ludwig Riesle, who eventually passed it on to his son, who lived in Michigan.
In 1934, a pastor from Detroit went to a conference of the Synod in Frankenmuth, Michigan, and stayed with his cousin's family. His cousin's husband wanted to show him an old German Bible that his father had had. And he brought it down, showed it to this pastor, and the pastor noticed right away Bach's signature on the title page.
The pastor, knowing the president of Concordia Seminary was a Bach enthusiast, told him about the Bible. In 1938, Concordia's president acquired it for the library.
It is quite a story. Nobody really knew it was here. Between when the seminary acquired the Bible and 1962, nobody actually paid much attention to it. In fact, they sort of rediscovered it when they moved into this new library from the old one.
Scholars have been studying it ever since. Bach's substantive comments are few and far between, but when he does offer his thoughts, they seem to close the book on long-held notions that Bach was not particularly devout, even though he wrote a lot of church music.
Bach was a very religious person, a very convinced Lutheran. What that side note says is, "Note well, this chapter is the true foundation of all God-pleasing church music." It seems he's looking for this in the Bible, the connection between music and worship and music and God.
The Bach Bible has undergone years of scrutiny to verify its authenticity.
In 1982, it was sent off to a lab at UC Davis for some very advanced testing of the ink, which they could really do for the first time without destroying a sample. They proved that it is consistent with what Bach would have had at hand for ink, that it matched other samples, and so it was kind of beyond a reasonable doubt actually his writing.
A facsimile of the Bach Bible has been published and is for sale. And on rare occasions, the original is put on public display, like at the seminary's annual Bach birthday celebration.
They're in awe, especially if they're Bach fans. In fact, we just had a group here from Japan that viewed the Bible, and they were kind of stunned silence for a minute.
There are 6,000 books in Concordia Seminary's rare book collection, each with a story to tell. But the real value of the Bach Bible is that it speaks volumes about the person who owned it.
The big thing we learn about Bach from looking at especially his notes in the Bible is the way he thought about music and God, how he combined his faith and his work, and really thought about what it means that music is being performed in a church. He saw a very deep connection there, perhaps a connection that transcends words.
For more St. Louis stories, subscribe to the HEC YouTube channel. Connect STL from HEC Media. New technology at the University of Missouri is diagnosing respiratory conditions sooner. MU Healthcare recently conducted its first scan of a patient's lungs using Xenon MRI. It's the second healthcare system in North America to begin imaging patients using this process when a patient inhales hyperpolarized gas during an MRI scan. The image on the left, that's a typical scan. The image on the right, that's from the Xenon scan.
What makes this technique especially unique is that it's not imaging tissue. What this technology does is image the gas itself.
After 30 years of research, hyperpolarized gas was recently approved by the FDA for patients ages 12 and older. The gas is now produced at the University of Missouri in the Next Gen Precision Health Building.
Fortunately, because we've been performing it for research, we are ready with the people who can now perform this clinically.
This is how it works. The patient inhales the gas while the MRI unit scans the lungs. The process takes only 10 to 15 seconds.
And that's what we call ventilation imaging. And you can see that that's one part of the gas exchange, is just getting the air into all areas of your lung.
Doctors say Xenon MRI really helps with lung diseases such as cystic fibrosis, COPD, cancer, and asthma.
And another one that I think is very intriguing is what many people call long COVID or post-COVID syndrome. So these are people who got COVID, recovered, but then have persistent symptoms like shortness of breath.
By using FDA-approved hyperpolarized xenon gas as an inhaled contrast for MRI scans, doctors say they can accurately measure lung ventilation or function in high detail like never before.
The really interesting thing about xenon is that we can not just look at where the xenon goes in the air spaces, but we can watch it transfer into that tissue, what we call the interstitium, and transfer into the red blood cells. So we can see all aspects of gas exchange with the xenon in a single breath hold that takes less than 20 seconds.
Doctors are provided with a highly detailed image of the patient's lungs to better help them diagnose and treat the disease.
I want to see your lungs. I want to see how your lungs are functioning, and I want to be able to make a clinical decision and manage you based on your own anatomy. The patient-specific approach, precision medicine.
And in diseases that are called obstructive lung diseases like asthma and COPD, the air doesn't get everywhere. And so we can see which areas of the lung ventilate well and which areas of the lungs don't ventilate. And then if we give a treatment, we can see whether that actually improves lung ventilation in that patient, so that we can direct our treatments at what's actually causing that patient's symptoms. We can also learn more about each of these lung diseases in different patients and the relative contributions of all of these things.
Doctors say Xenon MRI provides a better way
to understand the progression of lung disease without exposure to radiation.
For some lung diseases, we do CAT scans twice a year, and over 20 years, that's a lot of radiation. If we could replace that with something like xenon gas MRI, now I've taken 20 years worth of radiation and I've turned it into no radiation.
HEC Media, recognized, celebrated, honored time and again for excellence in the industry. HEC Media has been bringing home the hardware for over a decade. Arts and education to author talks, magazine shows and documentaries, individual craft achievements to overall excellence. Find all of the award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
Hello, I'm Donna Dotson. I'm standing right now in my solo exhibition at the World Chess Hall of Fame in St. Louis. My show is called Match of the Matriarchs and Other Amazonamakis, and it's featuring a life-size, all-female figure chess set and also 8 other sculptures. The way that I create my sculptures is that I find logs of different types of hardwoods in New England and I carve them with a chainsaw. I rough out the shape, and then I use traditional tools like a mallet, chisel, rasp, sandpaper until I sand it and finish the figure, and I usually add some accents of color using paint. My inspiration for making what we believe is the world's first and only life-size female chess set was the magnificent ocean creatures, the large whale and the giant squid. Chess is normally a game where you have kind of a bird's eye view of the board. The goal of this exhibition is to immerse you in the chess set and to make you think about the creatures of the sea and for you to see yourself in some of the figures and to think about different stories of women's lives throughout history that are being celebrated. Traditionally, chess sets feature just the queen, the lone female piece on the board. And so I wanted to create a chess set where all the figures are female. And so we might think about how women hold power. This set is inspired by my own powerful women in my family, my mother, my aunts, my grandmothers, and how they've influenced my life. And I want women to see the show and feel part of it. Also really thinking about women grandmaster chess players and thinking about women and girls being in the game and having it be a safe social space for girls to compete and come and play chess at the World Chess Hall of Fame. One thing you can see on exhibit that will actually live in the World Chess Hall of Fame going forwards is a piece I call the Mad Woman of Chess, and that is a permanent commission. The history of chess is that the figures used to just be the king and different male military figures. In about the 10th century, the queen came on the board, but in the 15th or 16th century, the rules were rewritten to make the game faster, and the queen became the most powerful piece on the board. She could move an unlimited number of squares in any direction, and there was some backlash. People insulted that and called her pejoratively the Mad Woman of Chess, relating her to like a wild woman running all over the board. And so I wanted to bring the Mad Woman of Chess to life. One of the really special things about this exhibit is the curator, Shannon Bailey, has selected many unique chess sets featuring sea life or shells or nautical figures that really display the breadth of human creativity. One thing I was able to do with this show that I've never done before is to create a miniature version of the life-size chess set. I was using very high-tech 3D scanning and printing technologies to create a standard-sized set of the Match of the Matriarchs, and that's also on view in the gallery. I really hope you'll come see my show at the World Chess Hall of Fame. It'll be on view through September 15th, 2024. And to find out more about the exhibition, you can visit the website, which is worldchesshof.org.
With every stroke of the bow, every stroke of the brush, with every stroke of genius, the arts make life in St. Louis richer, not just emotionally, but also economically. In our region, the arts create almost $600 million a year in economic activity, supporting more than 19,000 jobs, generating almost $60 million for state and local governments, with almost 12 million annual arts-related visits. That's more than all St. Louis sporting events combined. Whether in a park, on a street, or a wall, experimental or a classic, the arts deserve our support because the arts help support us. HEC Media is proud to be our region's home for arts, education, and culture because in St. Louis, the arts mean business.
History Spotlight, brought to you by HEC Media and the Missouri Historical Society.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jody Sowell, President of the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis, and this is History Spotlight. Elizabeth Keckley's talent as a seamstress not only freed her from slavery, but also earned her a job in the White House as the dresser and confidant of Mary Todd Lincoln. Public historian Andrew Wonko shares her story.
One of the most fascinating life stories of any St. Louisan is perfectly summed up in the subtitle of her autobiography, 30 Years a Slave and 4 Years in the White House. Those divisions of time and life experience separated out the life of Elizabeth Keckley, but what's even more amazing than their contrast is the personal determination she had that caused them to happen. Elizabeth Keckley was born into slavery in Virginia in 1818, and throughout her young life, she suffered horrific abuse at the hands of her enslavers. In 1847, she had been transferred to the Garland family, and they brought her along to St. Louis when they moved here seeking fortune. They had hoped to make big bucks in the boomtown of St. Louis, but they actually only found lots of personal debt. And seeking a way to make money, they turned to Elizabeth Keckley's skills as a seamstress as a primary source of the family's income. As word spread around St. Louis about the incredible and exquisite dresses that Elizabeth Keckley was producing, she built up a massive waiting list of clients made up of St. Louis's wealthy white elite citizens. Elizabeth Keckley later recalled that with her needle, she put bread in the mouths of 17 people for 2.5 years. Keckley was not just providing an income for the Garland family and the 9 other people that they held in slavery, she was also saving up her own money on the side. By 1855, she had saved up $1,200, that's the equivalent of about $37,000 today, and was able to purchase freedom for herself and her son George. For the next 5 years, they stayed in St. Louis, continuing to make dresses and build up wealth, and in 1860, Keckley moved to Washington, D.C. to open a dressmaking shop catering to the political elite of the country. On the day of President Abraham Lincoln's presidential inauguration, Elizabeth Keckley was introduced to the brand new First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln. Mary Todd was a huge fan of Keckley's sophisticated, clean dresses and invited Keckley to become her personal dresser. She also became Mary Todd Lincoln's close confidant and sat in on private family moments in the Lincoln White House for the next 4 years. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, Keckley traveled along with Mary Todd and the children to Illinois, and she was one of very few people who was given some of Abraham Lincoln's personal effects after his death. In 1868, Elizabeth Keckley published her autobiography titled Behind the Scenes, or 30 Years a Slave and 4 Years in the White House. The book was a huge hit, and it provided this incredible look into Elizabeth Keckley's life growing up on a southern plantation and the time she spent in St. Louis. But it actually invited an incredible amount of scandal and criticism because it gave these juicy details into the private personal lives of the Lincoln family. This was in an era when all of life's messy details were supposed to be socially suppressed as much as possible, and here she was talking about the top family in the country. The criticism was especially ferocious because she was a black woman talking about a white family from the country's elite. While today we would look at Elizabeth Keckley's writings about Mary Todd Lincoln with a more relatable honesty, that she was both a loving mother and also a person who suffered from anxiety and depression, in the moment this was incredibly scandalous. While the first people to pick up Elizabeth Keckley's autobiography were flipping through just to get to the juicy details about the Lincoln family, time has completely changed that, and we now look to her autobiography as an incredible source of information about her life as an enslaved woman and the kind of things she faced growing up in St. Louis and beyond. Elizabeth Keckley continued to make dresses up through the 1890s, and she passed away in 1907 in Washington, D.C.
Next week on History Spotlight, Satchel Paige's long and storied history with the city of St. Louis.
To learn more about the Missouri Historical Society, visit mohistory.org. Later on Spotlight, the legendary Harvey Girls and how they made Union Station famous.
My name is Addison Hanna. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I started blowing glass here at Third Degree Glass Factory when I saw it at the St. Louis Art Fair when I was 15 years old. So the process for glass blowing, I start with a molten gather, a clear glass, and then from there I'll layer it with colors. I'll add more clear glass and start to manipulate it. Usually we'll have 1 to 2 assistants helping me create my work. When it's at 2,000 degrees, it flows like honey, which is really nice for sculpting it. You're able to really capture motion in the piece. Glass blowing is known as one of the most difficult art forms to master. It has a highest learning curve because we never directly touch the medium. We use metal, wood, and paper as extensions of our fingertips. So the difficulty of it is kind of what drew me to glass. What I love about glass blowing is the inherent difficulty of it. You only have 30 seconds to work with the material before it's too cold. Cold is a relative term that's around 1,000 degrees. So our working temperature is anywhere between 1,200 and 2,000 degrees. 2,000 degrees is quite hot. It's around the surface temperature of a volcano. So at that, the material is actually glowing orange. It's not orange glass, it's glowing orange. It's so hot, it's emitting its own light. It's undergoing what's called a red shift. All your movements have to be very quick and precise. So there's a lot to do with a limited amount of time. Most of my work is refined vessels and bowls based off like traditional Venetian techniques. A lot of my sculptural work, though, is inspired by nature. I spent a large portion of my time in southeastern Alaska, where I surrounded myself in nature, working at a glass studio there. I was fortunate to learn from numerous glass sculptors like Raven Sky River, Kelly Odell, which helped inspire me to create animal sculptures and also the foundation for my sculptural approach. I usually will take animals that I enjoyed from my childhood and try to just kind of put life into them.
Addison Hanna will be at the Laumeier Sculpture Park Annual Art Fair, May 10th through the 12th. Visit laumeiersculpturepark.org for more information. You can find the stories featured in today's show along with past episodes and more at hecmedia.org/spotlight.
What do the Old West, trains, fine food, and St. Louis Union Station have in common? Author Stephen Fried will tell you Fred Harvey and his Harvey Girls.
The Harvey Company in its heyday was the largest hospitality business in the world.
Fried wrote Fred Harvey's biography, Appetite for America, and describes the transplanted Englishman as Ray Kroc before McDonald's and J.W. Marriott before Marriott Hotels. Harvey started his first restaurant in St. Louis in the late 1850s.
And then he got out of the business for a number of years. And then in his early 40s decided to get back into it because he traveled the railroads a lot.
What Fred Harvey found as he traveled out west during the glory days of train travel was that the food was terrible at each stop.
You know, keep in mind, there weren't Union stations then. Railroads had their own tracks, their own stations.
Harvey believed that clean, well-organized restaurants with good food and efficient service would lure travelers. The owners of Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Rail Line agreed, and the first chain of Harvey restaurants were built with some 60 locations in what was considered cowboy country.
And so they started very small, just in Kansas. They expanded into Colorado, into New Mexico, into Arizona, and then all the way across to the Pacific.
But the men hired to serve along the railway didn't meet Harvey's high standards. His next innovative idea was recruiting educated young women called Harvey Girls.
You had to be a little special. You couldn't just be run-of-the-mill.
94-year-old Mary Spiller of Afton was just 17 years old in 1944, the youngest to be hired as a Harvey girl along with her older sister. It was wartime, and Union Station was teeming with troops.
We were waiting on some soldiers, and we're giggling and going on, and Mr. Parker would walk by and he'd stamp this thing, get going, you know.
In 1946, the release of the George City movie The Harvey Girls, starring Judy Garland, cemented their legendary status.
The Harvey system, I must say, primarily pertains to the absolute perfection in the way we feed the trains.
Perfection in the dining room, perfection in the dorm. We even want perfection in the Harvey uniform.
These were wholesome girls from the Midwest and East Coast who served patrons in nun-like uniforms. Harvey girls helped bring a bit of sophistication to all of Fred Harvey's restaurants, particularly to the untamed West.
You don't blow on your soup. You fan it with your hat.
Oh. Black shirt waist, cuffs neat and trim. The apron must be spotless from the collar to the hem.
And from the 1880s through the 1940s, 100,000 single women in America had this experience.
Wherever a Harvey house appears, civilization is not far behind.
Harvey girls were true pioneers in the 1870s when few single women traveled or worked outside the home.
They were adventurous women when you think about it.
St. Louis Union Station historian Darlene Minetti says following the Great Depression of the late 1800s, the economy was rebooted. That led to St. Louis building the first major Union Station in the country in 1894. Fred Harvey was hired to service the entire building, from retail stores to his signature restaurants. It was his only business that was not situated along the Santa Fe Railway.
The Station Grill was one, if not the Harvey restaurant.
Correct, it was the main one. But up until the Depression, it was thriving. At the Depression, we had to close it, sad to say. But it reopened in 1960 because it was more for the locals at that point.
Imported linens and tableware along with prime steak was a classic Harvey trademark.
One steak, very rare.
Not everyone could become a Harvey girl. It was something of a status symbol. They had to be single between the ages of 17 and 30, be able to travel, and sign a 6-month contract. They also went through some rigorous training.
They were very strict about what you did, the way you did it, and everything.
In 2019, during the 125th anniversary of St. Louis Union Station, Mary returned to the place that meant so much to her so many years ago.
And it always was special in my life.
She kept an ashtray and her uniform bow tie, but Mary says her older sister left with much more.
There was a soldier that was transferred, and she waited on him one day, and he was stationed at Jefferson Barracks, and she wound up marrying him.
While Fred Harvey may not be a familiar name to many, the contribution of his Harvey girls along with St. Louis Union Station may be his lasting legacy in the Gateway City.
The apron must be spotless and must have the proper swirl. That's the first requirement of a Harvey girl.
Next week, a baseball historian tells us who invented baseball and how they figured out that difficult answer. Plus, a program helping children from underprivileged communities achieve success. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.